Back in 1881, 25 American men, led by a lieutenant named Adolphus Greely, set out on what was one of the most ambitious scientific missions of its time. Their goal was to set up an observation post in the high Arctic, farther north than almost anyone had ever dared to spend the winter. This old thing was born out of this amazing moment of international cooperation and scientific optimism. But it would end in a desperate, horrifying fight for survival that pushed these men to the absolute edge of what a human being can endure. So let's get into it. Let's explore how a mission that started with so much hope spiraled into one of history's most harrowing survival stories.
Okay, before we even get started, you have to hear this. This quote from Greely himself really frames everything we're about to talk about. He wrote this after it was all over in the preface to his book. He's telling us, right from the jump, that this story ends in a place that words can't even describe, a place of just unimaginable suffering. It's a warning, really. What started as this noble scientific quest is going to end in a complete nightmare. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we go back to the hopeful beginning.
So what was the point of all this? This wasn't just some ego trip to be the first to the pole. The Greely expedition was actually America's part in the very first International Polar Year. And this was a huge deal in the world of science. You had 11 different nations. We're talking the German Empire, Russia, Norway, all agreeing to put their rivalries aside and work together. The idea was to build this whole network of research stations in the polar regions, to collect data on weather, on the Earth's magnetic field, the aurora, all at the same time. It was science on a global scale, something that had never really been tried before.
And this wasn't some shoestring operation either. On March 3, 1881, the U.S. Congress put up $25 grand for it. Now that might not sound like a lot, but in today's money, you're looking at well over $500,000. So this was a serious government-backed expedition. It carried the weight of national pride and scientific ambition. They set out with every reason to believe this was going to be a massive success.
And here's the official mission statement, the whole reason they were going. The Lady Franklin Bay Expedition. Their destination was this tiny, remote spot on the coast of what's now Nunavut in Canada, way up north of the 81st parallel. To put that into perspective, that is less than 600 miles from the North Pole itself. And their primary job wasn't to plant the flag or claim territory. It was to sit and watch and just meticulously record the rhythms of the Arctic for the benefit of science all over the world.
And these were some of the men who signed up for it. 25 guys in total. A mix of military officers and enlisted men, a lot of them from the Signal Corps, which was kind of like the nation's weather service back then. You've got the commander, Greely, his ambitious second-in-command, Lieutenant Lockwood, who would actually go on to set a new record for farthest north, and you've got Sergeant Rice, the photographer, who gave us the haunting images of their journey. These were smart, capable guys, setting off on what they thought was going to be the adventure of a lifetime. They had no idea what was waiting for them.
So after a long, tough voyage, their ship, the Proteus, finally made it to Lady Franklin Bay in August of 1881. The journey was over, but the real work was just about to begin. They had to build a home from scratch in one of the most brutal environments on the entire planet. They would call it Fort Conger. The minute they landed, it was just non-stop work, and the efficiency is pretty incredible when you think about it. They unloaded tons and tons of supplies, including 130 tons of coal. Can you even imagine? The men were pulling grueling 14, sometimes 16-hour days to put together their prefabricated house. And even before the house was finished, they started their scientific work, taking weather readings every single hour. But it's that last step. That's the one that gives you chills. On August 18th, Greely discharged the Proteus. The ship sailed away, and just like that, their last connection to home, to the rest of the human race, was gone. They were totally, completely on their own. And the pressure of that isolation, it started to show almost immediately. Just a week after the ship disappeared over the horizon, the first major crack in the group's unity appeared. Lieutenant Kislingberry, who was Greely's second-in-command, got into it with him over what he felt were these overly strict military rules. The fight got so bad that Kislingberry actually formally asked to be relieved of his duties, and Greely said yes, but where was he going to go? The ship was gone, so he was trapped, stuck there as this high-ranking but powerless, disgruntled passenger. A seed of conflict was planted right there at the very beginning. And get this, just 2 days after that whole blow-up, Greely holds their first Sunday service. And he chooses to read a psalm with this specific verse in it, all about brothers dwelling together in unity.
He wrote in his journal that he felt he had to talk about how depressing their isolation was, hoping the men would try to get along. It's such a telling moment. You can feel him trying to hold his tiny, fragile world together, already sensing the psychological dangers that were closing in. So as the sun dipped below the horizon for the last time, plunging them into the months-long polar night, the men had to deal with not just the tension in their ranks, but the crushing darkness itself. And the way they fought it was pretty remarkable, with routine, with intellect, and with a stubborn sense of civilization.
I mean, just look at this. This shows you Greely's strategy for keeping his men sane. He knew that boredom was just as big an enemy as the cold. They had a library with over 1,000 books. They held classes, teaching each other math and meteorology. They even published their own newspaper, called the Arctic Moon. It was like they built a tiny university and a social club, all inside this one wooden building at the top of the world.
And this comparison really just says it all, doesn't it? It shows how relatively comfortable they were that first year. A normal dinner was simple, sure, but it was plenty of food. But for their first Christmas, they threw a feast that was just staggering. Mock turtle soup, roast beef, tenderloin of muskox, plum pudding, even ice cream, which, was probably the easiest thing to make up there. It was this defiant act of celebration in the middle of all that darkness. And the tragic irony, of course, is that in a couple of years, these same men would be starving to death, dreaming of a single moldy cracker.
But let's not forget the reality just outside their door. The environment was just relentlessly brutal. In November of 1881, the temperature dropped to almost 50 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. Greely noted that their rum got so thick with the cold that you could literally turn the bottle upside down and it wouldn't pour out. It had turned to syrup. It's just a crazy reminder of the extreme physics of the world they were now living in.
And through it all, they did their job. Day in and day out, in that endless dark and crippling cold, the men would go out to their unheated observation stations and take their readings. Hourly weather data, magnetic measurements, tidal charts. By every scientific standard you could measure, that first year of the expedition was a massive, unqualified success. They were doing exactly what they came to do.
But here's the thing. As successful as that first year was, everything hinged on one crucial event, the relief ship that was supposed to arrive in the summer of 1882. So as the sun finally came back, a new feeling started to creep into Fort Conger: anticipation. Their first year of duty was done. It was time to get news from home.
You can just feel the hope slowly souring into dread as you follow this timeline. In early July, the sea ice starts to break up. Yes, a surge of optimism. A few weeks later, they spot a walrus, a sure sign the channel is open for a ship. The men start scanning the southern horizon constantly, just waiting to see a column of smoke. But July turns into August, and the horizon stays empty. And then the real fear sets in. By late August, new ice is already starting to creep back into the harbor. The very short Arctic summer is ending. Their window to the outside world is closing fast.
Now, on paper, they weren't in immediate peril. They had supplies for 2 years, and the official plan called for a resupply in '82. If that failed, another ship was supposed to come in 1883 to pull them out. So the 1882 ship not showing up wasn't a death sentence, not yet. They had rations, they had shelter, but, a plan written on a piece of paper in a warm office in Washington, D.C. is a cold comfort when you're the one trapped in the ice, facing the psychological reality of being forgotten.
And Greely's own words just captured the raw emotional punch of this moment. Here's this disciplined military man, and even he admits the blow was just deeper and harder than any of them could have prepared for. It wasn't just about missing fresh food or letters from home. It was the crushing silence from a world they'd left behind. It was the feeling of abandonment. The first true taste of despair had finally arrived at Fort Conger.
So the men of the Lady Franklin Bay expedition had proven they could survive the Arctic. They'd built a home, they'd done priceless science, they'd endured the endless polar night. But as that second long winter started to fall, a new, much more terrifying question was taking shape. They knew how to survive the cold and the dark. But how do you survive the slow, crushing certainty that you have been completely and utterly left behind? The true horror of their story was only just beginning.